Welcome to the Wake Up Call podcast. I'm your host, Alicia Hopkins, life coach, recovering perfectionist, crazy animal lover, and your go-to friend for all things wellness. If you're the type of woman who constantly feels burned out, overwhelmed, and like you have zero time for yourself, then this is the show for you. I'll show you that it is completely possible to live a life you look forward to every single day by learning simple, actionable steps to start putting yourself first. Burnout and overwhelm are not welcome here, but a little bit of crazy sure is. So if you're ready for your wake-up call with a girl who's not afraid to drop an F-bomb every now and then, let's dive in. Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Wake Up Call podcast. So today you are about to hear an interview. And my gosh, when I think about it, it has probably been 5, maybe 6 months since I've had an interview. And if you've been listening to this podcast since the inception, you would know that this podcast first started with a lot of interviews. And I actually had a lot of insecurities around doing solo episodes. So I find it funny that here lately, that's all I've been doing. And I found myself feeling a little anxious going into an interview since it's been so long. But what I am so excited about is this interview today is talking about something near and dear to me, and it's talking about anxiety, more specifically, this concept of high functioning anxiety. So you may hear that phrase and say, what does that mean? I'm not sure I know what you're talking about. So listen to this. Do you struggle with having a harsh inner critic? Do you have a lot of negative self talk? Do you do a lot of overthinking and find it really difficult to relax? And even though all of those things are playing out, you have a lot of success in your life, right? You're crushing it, doing well in your job, doing great as a mom. Like you're the person people look at and say like, wow, she's got it all together. All the while, this internal struggle is going on. So it's this concept, right, that you are functioning in your life, like things are fine. You're not, prevented from accomplishing and doing things in your life. But yeah, you're really struggling on the inside with anxiety. So today's guest is Tati Garcia. She is a licensed professional counselor and a coach, and she specializes in working with people who relate to having high functioning anxiety. Her passion lies in guiding ambitious achievers to overcome anxiety and burnout so they can feel calmer from within and stop overthinking everything. I don't know about you, but that sounds glorious. So Tati is here. She's going to break down this concept of high functioning anxiety with the intention of you being able to identify if this might be something that's playing out in your life. We go through, what does it look like? What might this present in someone? And she provides some really great actionable ways that if you're relating to this high functioning anxiety, some steps you can start taking to move through this and create a greater awareness that high functioning anxiety is playing out in your life so you can start to have a different experience of your day to day. So guys, I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. It felt so good to be back in an interviewing seat with this. I look forward to many more interviews to come. So without further introduction, let's go ahead and jump into my conversation with Tati Garcia. Well, Tati, I am so excited to have you here today. This is a topic that is near and dear to me. And I also think that so many of the listeners out there today are going to relate. So we're just going to jump right into it. I would love if you could start out with an explanation of what exactly does high functioning anxiety mean? What is it?
I'm super excited to be here as well. And so, high functioning anxiety, put simply, is when somebody is high achieving and hardworking on the outside, while on the inside, they're struggling with anxiety, with feeling overwhelmed. They could potentially be on the road to burnout. They're experiencing a lot of self doubt and overthinking. So, it's this combination of having anxiety on the inside when like on the outside people may not necessarily know that you're struggling, and actually your anxiety might be propelling you forward into taking action that's going to result in your success.
What I find so interesting about this is I wish one, I would have known about the term high functioning anxiety a lot sooner.
Mhm.
Two, I think that what you just described is how so many people are moving through the world and just accepting that, like, they just think it's normal, that this is just how they should feel. And I'm wondering if you could describe a little bit more about what might it look like? How does it manifest if someone is having high functioning anxiety? like, what might it look like in their life?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's definitely true that a lot of people might not realize that this is what's actually happening with them. And they might just think this is the way that I am, or this is the way that I need to get things done. Some ways of what it might look like is, if you have difficulty relaxing, and you feel like you always need to be busy, and you feel like I'm lazy if I relax or take a break, or you might be really hard on yourself and have a harsh inner critic. So by that I mean, like, you beat yourself up if you don't meet your expectations. So you might have really high expectations for yourself. And at the same time, it might be, when it comes to relationships, it might be difficult for you to say no to others. This could be in relationships or at work, because of the anxiety, the fear of, what if I miss out on an opportunity, or what if this person is mad at me? It can also look like, um, getting in this place of overworking and overachieving, sometimes at the expense of your own self care and your own mental health. So, a lot of times the priority can be on achievement, on pleasing others, and your own needs come last. Yeah, so those are some of the ways that it might show up that come to mind for me, in addition to just what you might experience typically with anxiety, which is things like overthinking, that you might have physical symptoms, like maybe shallow breathing, like, it could potentially be panic attacks if it's on the more intense side of having significant anxiety. Um, could look like tension in your body, because of just the buildup of stress. It might be difficulty concentrating or focusing, because you're overthinking and worrying about things all the time. And another way it can look is difficulty sleeping. So maybe you have trouble falling asleep at night or staying asleep because you're feeling anxious, or because there's so many things going through your mind. So it can really affect a lot of different aspects, of your life and of your day to day.
I feel like everything you just described would have been if there could have been a camera following my actions and like the thoughts in my head of Alicia, say 5 years ago, everything you just described, I completely relate to. And I have a sneaking suspicion there's a lot of people out there listening right now, and they're probably nodding as you were describing all those different things. And I know for me, it felt like there was so much inner dialogue and also too, like, on the physical side of things, it's like I felt like there was almost like an electricity, like an electronic charge just pulsing through me all the time, compelling me to just always be like doing. And like I really relate to what you said about the distractions. I really appreciate you painting out the specifics because I'm a firm believer in if you can name it, you can tame it. And I do
Mhm.
think there's such an acceptance for people who relate to this phrase of high functioning anxiety. They've probably experienced a lot of success in their life. They're, like you said, high achiever, doing well in their job, crushing it in life, but at what cost? And I'm curious to see, if unmanaged, I know you alluded to burnout, but what do you see as kind of like the breakdown moment, or like what's the moment that people start realizing something else must be going on other than just this is the way it is?
Yeah. And I think you point out something important, that, it can be that double edged sword of, you're doing well, but then you're struggling on the inside. So it's kind of like, sometimes you can feel like you need to struggle in order to succeed. And so it feels like these behaviors are justified, or feeling this way is justified. And I think, it could be different for different people, but a lot of people with high functioning anxiety, it can get to a point of burnout. And that's when you have nothing left in your reserves. Like, your tank is empty, and you might struggle with not feeling motivation when it comes to things that you might have been motivated for before, feeling potentially cynicism towards your work, or towards others. And you have just gotten to a point where you've been pushing so hard without filling up your own tank, essentially, that you have nothing left to give. And so that point of burnout might be, for some people, um, I've worked with clients and also spoken with people that they get to the point where they feel like the anxiety is so intense that they actually think they're having a heart attack because the physical symptoms are so intense. They might be having panic attacks. And so for them, it might lead to being hospitalized because they feel like there's something physically wrong. And then for some people, it might just be, it could be a combination of both, but it could also be the emotional wear and tear that comes from just being drained and feeling like, you have nothing left to give. So I think that can be where it can end up for some people if you're not recognizing and treating or becoming aware of what you're struggling with and caring for yourself.
I relate to this a lot. And when you said that for a lot of people, it's like you're doing well on the outside, but you're struggling on the inside. And when I reflect back to, like, I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't pinpoint what it was because I had all the markings of things being just fine on the outside. But yet, for me, how it manifested was I started having panic attacks while I was driving. I would pull over on the side of the road. I mean, it was awful. And it took that, like, for me, that was kind of like the wake up call, if you will, that I thought, okay, I've got to figure out, like, I don't know what's wrong or what's happening. And it's interesting is that this high functioning anxiety, it's almost like, I don't know if I view it as like, or is it appropriate to call it kind of like a coping mechanism? Like, I just, it's how I knew how to operate. And I think a lot of people out there do. It's like we're trying to fill a void internally by continuously like pumping energy and efforts into things external, like career, being the best friend, the best partner, the best this, the best that. And it's almost like, to me, it represents just this massive misalignment that ends up showing itself if we don't stop it before it gets to the point, like cue panic attacks, this, that, the other. But why do you think high functioning anxiety starts showing up in people?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that a lot of times it can be something that's learned. So, of course, with anxiety in general, there's a genetic component. So, let's say if your biological parent, grandparents, aunts, uncles, whatever might have had anxiety, there could be more of a likelihood that you could struggle with that. And, when it comes to that high functioning anxiety part, I think what can lead to that is that you may have learned, let's say through school. I think perfectionism a lot of times can be something that's learned through school. And that's something that can show up a lot in high functioning anxiety. Like, I need to get the best grades, I need to do perfectly. And so then you might have pushed yourself to the point of stress and feeling anxious about projects, exams, and then learned that this is what I need to do in order to get these results, in order to be successful. I think that it doesn't always translate well into adulthood because if you think of how our performance is kind of like measured, there's not necessarily the black and white of you passed, you failed. In my opinion, I think that then that can, because of there's ambiguity in how you might receive feedback, like maybe you won't even receive feedback at all because it might be more challenging for some like managers or colleagues to provide you with positive feedback unless it's something that's planned in advance, like a review or something like that. Um, so you might not be getting the clear feedback as to like, how am I doing? How am I performing? Am I doing good enough? And so that, I think, combined with these inner limiting beliefs that I think a lot of us have of like, I'm not good enough. And then feeling like you constantly need to achieve more in order to, like you mentioned, fill that void, like prove that you are good enough, can turn into this cycle of I need to just work harder to prove myself to others. And so I think external achievement and validation and just reassurance can become this never-ending chase that can quell that anxiety in the short term. So there, of course it's going to be different for everybody, but of am I doing a good enough job? Am I a good enough person? Or do people like me? Those internal worries can then result in you engaging in these behaviors of, let me just prove myself more, work harder, accomplish more to try and, like I said, quell that anxiety and manage those insecurities in the short term, if that makes sense.
Oh my gosh, so much sense because it's kind of what I'm hearing is we're applying the logic of what got us quote unquote success as we're right, like going through school, this, that, the other, get the good grades, have the GPA, go to the college, whatever. And then all of a sudden we're applying what we've learned to be kind of this recipe for success into then say adulthood where there's not a clear right wrong, but yet for call it anywhere from 18 to 22 years of existence, we're going through the world of like just achieve these metrics, these milestones. This is what good looks like. And I know for me, it's overwhelming then when it's like you're searching for then like what's good, what's the right wrong. And it's like we're chasing some metric that doesn't exist. And I think that that's where the opportunity lies in us defining for ourself what is in a lot like what do I want for my life, and it can be
Mhm.
overwhelming I think when we've always had the structures to kind of guide us and then you're dropped into the world where if you are someone who really craves that desire to get it right, like do it perfect, you're like, well, what the heck is perfect and right, and you're chasing something that has no definition because you get to define it for yourself, and I think that's a hard concept for a lot of people to wrap their head around.
I think you put it really well that, it becomes this chase to kind of like uh, uncertainty. Like there's still so much uncertainty in that then that creates more anxiety. Cause, I like to say that anxiety thrives with uncertainty. And so the more uncertainty there is with, what am I working towards? Or when will it finally be enough? Then the more that creates a breeding ground for that fear and anxiety and that unworthiness because you're looking externally and the only place that you can really find that is internal. And so I think it's really only until you start to become more accepting of yourself, compassionate with yourself, that you're going to start to really address what's at the root of this.
I reflect on my experiences in therapy, coaching, just my own self, work that I've done. And the root always does come back to how I relate to uncertainty. And I think for a lot of us, when that uncertainty shows up, the triggered response is, let me go do something. And it's in learning to sit with the uncertainty and actually realize that everything all the time is uncertain, but it's how do you relate to it? How do you manage that? And I think that when we get to a healthier place with the uncertainty, at least I know in my life is when I've noticed the kind of the anxiety meter starts ticking down a little bit more when you let go of that need to control, to have the validation, like all of that stuff. I was listening to one of your podcasts recently and I think it's important to you highlighted that high functioning anxiety isn't like a mental health diagnosis. And I'm
Mhm.
curious to know if you could maybe speak to so high functioning anxiety versus say like generalized anxiety disorder. Like is it important to know the differences? Does it really matter? I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
It can be important from like a clinical sense, like if you're getting help from a therapist or psychiatrist, there can be overlap. So, somebody with high functioning anxiety can have generalized anxiety disorder and vice versa. The thing is that high functioning anxiety is kind of just, like you said, it's not a mental health diagnosis or disorder. It's really just a phrase that has come about to describe, what I described previously. Whereas with any mental health diagnosis, in order to meet the criteria, it needs to significantly impact your day to day functioning. So, with somebody with generalized anxiety disorder, maybe they have, mild, moderate, or severe anxiety, but it is getting in the way of them going to their job or taking care of themselves or having healthy relationships. So that really, according to the DSM, which is kind of like the Bible for psychiatric or psychological disorders, that's what needs to be met in order for you to have a disorder. But ultimately, I really think that the approach can be similar. You don't necessarily need to know I have this diagnosis in order to get support for it. Because, a diagnosis is really, it's not necessarily a definition of who you are. Because even if you have a diagnosis, that may not be something that is like pervasive throughout your whole life, unless, there are certain mental health disorders that is the case. But when it comes to anxiety and depression, those can be things that maybe at one point in your life you meet the criteria for the diagnosis, and it's, you could reach a point where you don't anymore, because it's really just a set of symptoms and signs that you may meet or fall into.
That makes a lot of sense. And when I'm listening to it, reflecting on my experience, what I think I can notice is almost that high functioning anxiety was taking place in my life. And then because I didn't realize it for the reasons you mentioned, that it's not impacting, you're generally still functioning in this world. I know for me, when I let that go unnoticed and mismanaged, I think for me, it turned into the generalized anxiety disorder. And the only reason I'm pointing this out is so that if someone out there is listening, and I learned through story and pointing out examples, but I can think about a time where it was actually physically difficult for me to get out the door. Like I would leave to go to work, panic would set in, I'd have to come home, like get my shit together and then try the day all over again. So to me, I'm hearing the difference. And I'm really glad you pointed on like a couple things that show up for me too is that regardless of whatever mental health challenges someone might be going through, it's never that something is wrong, but I do think
Mhm.
there's value in understanding what is happening so that you can take steps to create ease in your life. Like it is stressful to be run by anxiety all the time. And I think where it's a slippery slope with high functioning anxiety is because it's not impacting your day to day, you're still showing up. But I would argue, what is it doing to you internally, right? Like the
Mhm.
exhaustion, all of that. So I'm curious if you could share, someone's listening to this, they relate, they're like, yep, I think high functioning anxiety is running the show in my life. What might be like one or two things they could start doing to just start creating awareness around it or making change around it?
A few things that might be helpful for somebody that's like just figured out they're struggling with this, or maybe they have been for a while and they're not sure what to do, would be first to try and create more moments where you're taking care of yourself. And I know that's very like cliche to say, like practice self-care. But because with high functioning anxiety, a lot of those behaviors are you're always pushing yourself really hard and you're always busy, and it's difficult for you to relax. I like to think of it as a battery. When you have used up everything in your battery, then you've got nothing left to give. And when you're not recharging yourself or recharging your energy or just your emotional capacity by checking in with how you're feeling, there's going to be a limit, and that limit is burnout. And so, in order to avoid that, it's having more of a balance between giving to others and giving to yourself. So, whatever that looks like for you, it's going to be different for every person, but maybe it is waking up in the morning and just taking 10 to 20 minutes for yourself. Maybe it's doing a meditation or writing in a journal or exercise, going for a walk, reading a book you enjoy, even just like sitting down and enjoying your cup of coffee or tea. It could look like taking small breaks throughout the day, but really just taking more time for yourself rather than constantly going, going, going. Um, Even those small pockets, if you can take 5 minutes during the day, can make a big difference. And I think that's a good place to start. Another one is to notice your self talk. So, self talk is basically just the thoughts the things we say to ourselves internally. And a lot of the struggling that I notice that comes with high functioning anxiety is that harsh inner critic that I mentioned before, and having really negative self talk. If you notice that, let's say something doesn't go according to plan, or you do worse than you thought you might have, and you're being really hard on yourself or saying things like, why am I so stupid? Or I'm such a failure. Those things, it might seem minor, but that really has an impact on the way that you feel and on your just view of yourself and your self-worth. And so just the step of starting to become more aware of those things without judging yourself, I think can make a big difference, because you can start to catch and notice yourself when you're being hard on yourself or when you're focusing on the negative in a situation. And those are the first steps to starting to change those things, because it's not, like you said before, it's not right or wrong or bad or good. It's just that the things we think, the way that we speak to ourselves, there's consequences to it. And although you can't always control, I heard this from a podcast guest that I had on my podcast previously. He said, you can't control your first thought, but you can control your second. So, we all have thoughts that just come up that we don't have control over, but you can notice that thought and then choose to think differently. Once you're aware of it, then you have that choice.
So good. I love when you say the way we speak to ourselves, there's consequences to it, because I don't know how much people realize. Like, I think of all the negative self-talk or, harsh inner critic. It's almost like they're deposits. And every time you're having those thoughts, unknowingly, it's like they're building up. And like you said, it shapes the way you think about yourself. And I think this runs automated, that often we don't even notice it. So bringing that awareness, as silly as it might sound, or people are like, okay, have awareness. No, it really interrupts that cycle and the pattern,
Mhm.
so that you can stop depositing like all the negative thoughts and start. It's not even about then like bypassing and going to, you're wonderful, you're this. Could we just bring it to neutral? Like, just start on some neutral thoughts about yourself. And then of course, yes, it'd be great to like go to the ones that like build yourself up. But um I just really related to that. And I think that's such a good way to put it, is there's consequences of how we speak to ourselves.
Mhm.
So I would love, this is obviously your passion, your profession. You're a licensed professional counselor, you're a coach. You help women overcome burnout and anxiety so they can start feeling calmer and change that chronic overthinking. Tell us a little bit more about what you do. How do we connect with you? If someone's like, oh my gosh, I need some Tati, like, what are some of your offerings?
Yeah, thank you. So I actually help both men and women. And I have a local private practice in New Jersey. So I see clients that reside anywhere in the state of New Jersey for therapy. Globally, I provide coaching for people who are struggling with high functioning anxiety to help them feel calm, balanced, and confident from within. And then I also have a monthly membership community, the Calm and Ambitious community, that's for high achievers struggling with high functioning anxiety, where we provide support to each other. We have monthly Q&A calls where people can ask me their questions. And there's also a lot of trainings specific to high functioning anxiety and how you can start to feel calmer, combat that negative self talk. You can connect with me on Instagram at Tatiana G LPC. I have a podcast, Calmly Coping. And then if you're curious to find out if you might have high functioning anxiety yourself, I actually have a free quiz at hfaquiz.com. And it basically will bring you through a lot of what I discussed today and identifying what you're struggling with currently, and then seeing if you have high functioning anxiety so you can get more resources to help you with that.
So good. And we will have all of that outlined in the show notes. And what I do want to say is, I think that there's a lot of overlap. The people that are drawn to the content they find on this podcast, guys, if you're listening to this, you need to listen to Calmly Coping. What I will tell you is, I've newly found the podcast. I've been listening to it. I think your content is great. You always give clear explanations of what you're covering, and then actionable bite-sized tips to work on the thing that you're talking about. I learn something every time I listen. So everyone out there, go listen to Calmly Coping. Go follow Tati on Instagram, all the outlets. If you are relating to what we've talked about today, I think you're going to find tips, tricks, strategies to help reduce, the impact that anxiety is having. I can speak from personal experience. I know a lot of people out there are struggling with anxiety, especially in today's world, and there is a different outcome possible. So, Tati, I'm so thankful and grateful to have connected with you. Thank you for the insights you've shared. I'm really excited to talk with you about this, and I think that we've probably illuminated this concept of high functioning anxiety for a lot of people. And I hope it's been, a light bulb wake up call moment for them. So, everyone listening today, thank you so much for tuning in, and I can't wait to connect with you on a future episode. Bye, guys. Thank you so much for listening to the Wake Up Call podcast. If you liked what you heard today, I would love for you to subscribe and leave a review. It takes just a few minutes and does wonders for helping other people find the podcast. If you want to connect outside of the podcast, you can do so by following at Alicia D. Hopkins on Instagram. And if you really liked the episode you just listened to, do me a favor. Would you screenshot the episode and tag me? I would love to see what's resonating with you. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope today's episode helped you to see that you can wake up to the change that's possible in your life.